الصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I am Firasat, and on behalf of Indian Muslim Relief and Charities, I welcome you all, the listeners and viewers across the social media platforms, including Facebook and YouTube, to this Fireside Chat, a live event to discuss human rights in India, the road ahead post lockdown, with our esteemed speaker from India, Harsh Mander. Before we begin, we would like to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this blessed month of Ramadan, which came as a blessing for us to give tranquility to our hearts and mind and peace in these challenging times of COVID 19 and also the increasing oppression that we see in many parts of the world. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the last 10 days of Ramadan. And before we begin, we would like to introduce our young speaker and reciter of Quran, Brother Rashid Shanawaz, to open this program with the recitation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أنفقوا من طيبات ما كسبتم ومما أخرجنا لكم من الأرض ولا تيمموا الخبيث منه تنفقون ولستم بآخذيه إلا أن تغمضوا فيه واعلموا أن الله غني حميد الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء والله يعدكم مغفرة منه وفضلا والله واسع عليم يؤتي الحكمة من يشاء ومن يؤت الحكمة فقد أوتي خيرا كثيرا وما يذكر إلا أولو الألباب وما أنفقتم من نفقة أو نذرتم من نذر فإن الله يعلمه وما للظالمين من أنصار إن تبدوا الصدقات فنعما هي وإن تخفوها وتؤتوها الفقراء فهو خير لكم ويكفر عنكم من سيئاتكم والله بما تعملون خبير صدق الله العظيم. O you who believe, give of the good things that you have earned and from what we have produced for you from the earth. And do not pick the inferior things to give away when you yourselves would not accept it, except with eyes closed. And know that God is sufficient and praiseworthy. Shaitan promises you poverty and urges you to immorality, but God promises you forgiveness from himself and grace. God is embracing and knowing. He gives wisdom to whomever he wills. Whomever he is given wisdom has been given much good, but none pays heed except those with insight. Whatever charity you give or a pledge you fulfill, God knows it. The wrongdoers have no helpers. If you give charity openly, that is good. But if you keep it secret and give it to the needy in private, that is better for you. It will atone some of your misdeeds. God is cognizant of what you do.
Jazakallahu khairan kathira, Brother Rashid, for that beautiful recitation and translation. We'd like to remind our viewers and listeners that today's event is organized by Indian Muslim Relief and Charities, an organization that has been providing support on the ground in India for the upliftment of Muslims for the last 35 years through several projects in the healthcare sector, for example, through projects such as affordable healthcare, the poor and needy who can't access healthcare easily in the rural areas of India. To various projects in education sector by providing grants and scholarships to uplift Muslims in the education sector. It also provides support for orphans, student housing, you name it. And besides this, it also provides a relief and rehabilitation support for the victims of natural disasters and mass violence. So we'll encourage you to go to our website, imrcusa.org, to learn more about various projects and look at some of the metrics and the number of people who are benefiting from these various projects. Just to summarize, on an average, we have nearly about 1 million beneficiaries per year. Our work across India is ongoing. We provide support regularly, annually during Ramadan, but this year has been unique. Before Ramadan started, we had the COVID-19 situation. So we have been supporting victims of COVID-19 and poor migrant laborers and others who need the support in this challenging time. We are currently distributing food packages to people across 20 states of India, including Kashmir. As of last week, if we summarize, there have been 8 million meals in grains provided. About 42,000 families received their family food package. That's just, mashallah, that's a blessing, Ya Rabbal Alameen, that Allah has given us all. About 400,000 beneficiaries have availed the benefits of IMRC's programs in the last few months. So now we would take about a minute or two to introduce you to various programs that we are doing in India through a short video.
In these most vulnerable times of COVID-19 amidst the lockdown, millions of people have lost their livelihoods and are struggling to feed themselves. With nowhere to go and no hope, they wait for help each day. To bring back lost hope, IMRC and Sahaj. In these most vulnerable times of COVID-19 amidst the lockdown, millions of people have lost their livelihoods and are struggling to feed themselves. With nowhere to go and no hope, they wait for help each day. To bring back lost hope, IMRC and Sahayata Trust have stepped forward to the rescue of those hungry and helpless. Together with donors, we have fed around 2 lakh people to this day, provided 15,000 families with groceries and daily needs, and door-delivered free medicines to 600 patients. Standing by all the true heroes during this emergency, we have also supplied 2 lakh INR worth PPE to the medical staff. Following utmost safe and healthy measures in the process, our support extends to 12 states across India. Working round the clock, we are sending help to slums, orphanages, schools, migrant labor, mutts and hospital patients. We have also home-delivered supplies to those who put honor before hunger and do not come out in the open to ask for help. As the lockdown continues, our responsibility to feed the hungry also must go on. Your help will save another soul from going hungry today, because when you give, you not just make a donation, but you make a difference.
As you saw in the short video, various programs through which IMRC supports various impoverished groups, including Muslims in India. I would like to encourage you to go to our website, imrcusa.org, and continue to support us. Again, I'll take a moment to welcome all the viewers and listeners across the platform who have come to listen to our esteemed guest speaker, Mander, on the diminishing human rights uh, in India and what is the path forward after the lockdown. We encourage you to use the live comment section to post your comments and any questions you have, because we'll have a lengthy Q&A after her speaks for about 15 to 20 minutes. So again, I encourage you to go to the live comment section and post your comments and questions. Now let's move on to the next section. Before we go on, let me take a few minutes to introduce our esteemed speaker from India, Harsh Mander, who's going to speak on human rights in India that are under constant attack for the last 6 years or so. We have we have with us an esteemed guest speaker from India, Harsh Mander. He is currently the director of the Center for Equity Studies, a research organization based out of New Delhi. He's a former bureaucrat who served under various governments in India in the predominantly tribal states of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. And he left the service after what has happened in Gujarat in 2002 and started his journey of social activism. He continues to work with the survivors of mass violence and hunger, as well as homeless persons and street children. More recently, he's a teacher, teaching courses on poverty and governance at Indian School of Management in Ahmedabad, and also at St. Stephen's College in New Delhi. In the past, he has also taught at esteemed, prestigious universities, including at MIT, Stanford, and UCLA. He has authored and co authored several books, including, I would encourage you to check this out, The Reconciliation, Karwan e Mohabbat's Journey of Solidarity Through a Wounded India, wherein he ventured through various villages and towns and cities talking to the victims of mob lynching who were lynched in the name of cow. He is a researcher, he's a columnist who regularly writes for the leading newspapers such as the Hindu, Hindustan Times, and Dainik Bhaskar. And above all, let me say this, that he is a leading voice of our times for the human rights in India, particularly the rights of oppressed communities, including Muslims, Dalits, and tribals. IMRC has worked with Hirsch in supporting his programs for justice and equality. And before we hand over the microphone to Hirsch, I encourage again all of you to post your questions and comments so that we can anchor and relay those questions to Hirsch at the end of the program. With that, I welcome Hirsch to this program. Thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Salam to you, all of you who've gathered this morning. Greetings on Ramzan. This is a very, very difficult time that the whole world is passing through, and it's an extremely somber moment of reflection for all of us. I will speak very briefly to start with. This is a fireside chat, so I thought I'll make some very brief initial comments and really open up to chat with all of you. There's no fireside around. India's at 40 plus degrees, but certainly it would be wonderful to talk to all of you and to answer what is uppermost in your mind. All that I'd like to say to start with is that India, and I think many parts of the world, including the United States, but India in particular, is hurtling towards a humanitarian crisis of the scale and of the magnitude that I have not witnessed in my life, and I may be older than many people who are on this chat. I was born after partition, and I was born after the 1943 Great Bengal famine. But I fear that what India is hurtling towards is a crisis of that magnitude. I think what we also need to understand is that this crisis is one that has not been created by the virus. It has not been created by the pandemic. It has been created by public policies, conscious public policies. It has been created on the one hand by the kind of society we were and had become, and by the public policy choices that were made and endorsed by significant sections of the Indian ruling classes. Um, why do I say this? The India decided quite early on, when we had just about 100 detected cases of the coronavirus, uh, to go in for the most stringent lockdown uh, in the entire world. It has been rated to be the most stringent lockdown at 4 hours' notice from the Prime Minister. Uh, in this, he said 3 or 4 things. He said there should be a time when each of you should stay at home, work from home, keep social distance, uh, keep sanitation, wash your hands regularly, which sounds like great advice, except that he, better than anyone else, should have known that he is living in a country where a significant section of the people, 9 out of 10 workers in India, are in the informal sector. This means that they do not have the luxury of sitting at home and working and of getting their salary, as most of us in the middle class are. Uh, and they don't have any savings in the banks. Most of them don't have bank accounts. Uh, the Secondly, they don't. Many of them, a significant number, are homeless, and those who have homes, uh, a large majority of them are living in shanties of 10 by 10, maybe, where you're expecting a family of 8 or 10 people to live in a shanty of 10 by 10 in hot temperatures for what started off as 21 days and now has gone on to a 50-day lockdown. Uh, you expect people to wash their hands regularly for a set of people who have no supply of drinking water or running water. People who have to buy pots of water and sometimes spend as much as a fifth of their daily earnings on a pot of water. So, in all of this, I think the important thing to understand is that this was a measure that, even in principle, could do nothing to actually offer protection and safety from the pandemic to large segments of the poor. Who it did offer a sense of safety was to the middle class and to the rich. The Prime Minister, in his initial speech, actually made only one reference to the poor, where he said civil society should look after the poor. That was all, as if it was not the responsibility of the state. In his next address, where he announced the extension of the lockdown, when the whole distress was visible, he said, "I appeal to employers to pay salaries to their workers through the lockdown, as though it was basically an act of private charity." What he overlooked was not only that 9 out of 10 workers are in the informal sector, but that as many as 83% of these workers have no identifiable employer. Only 17% of these workers have an identifiable employer. So even if anyone was to pay wages other than the state, it would be for 17%. And a large segment of this 17% are people whose employers are themselves very small enterprise owners. And there's no reason that they neither had the capacity nor the duty, because the lockdown was not of their creation. And so, in effect, nothing was provided for these people, a small economic package which amounted to, say, 500 rupees to transfers to some people who had bank accounts. Now, 500 rupees amounts to maybe 1 or 1.5 days of, of salary. So imagine that if the middle class had been told that you'll have to stay at home and you'll get, some of you will get 1.5 days of salary, but the rest of you will get nothing. Maybe 5 kilos of grain, and that also if you have a card. How would life look like to them? And this is what actually was done to the poor. The consequences of it have been devastating. And I have been on the streets from the second day after the lockdown, because we could not bear the distress. So I worked among the homeless. We started work with the homeless, thinking that they will be in absolutely the worst condition. But very quickly we found that it was not just the homeless. Large masses of people, even those who worked in small factories earlier, small cooking establishments, people who lived in small in shanties and so on, street vendors. There was a whole range of people who had been reduced to overnight into situations of hunger. Now, hunger is something that I have known. I have never lived with hunger, but I've worked closely with people with hunger. As a district officer in the IAS, I've seen situations of rural hunger when there have been drought. I have seen, I was a commissioner, one of the two commissioners appointed by the Supreme Court in the iconic right to food case, with the duty to see whether hunger was, whether people were living with hunger. And in those 12 years, I did see a lot of starvation and mass hunger. But with all of that experience, I have never seen this kind and this scale of hunger of the kind that I'm seeing in urban India. In urban India, hunger for a significant section of people, like the homeless, was always one heartbeat away. But most of all, it was kept at bay because the city provided you opportunities. If nothing else, you would sort waste and earn some money for food. You would pull a rickshaw, you would push. There was some work for everybody, as long as you were willing to do work which was at the lowest end, unprotected, unsafe, but there was work. And if nothing else worked, you had the gurdwaras, you had the dargahs, you had the temples. Food, so hunger was, as I said, a heartbeat away in the city, but very, very few people actually had to live with hunger. That is what has changed, and it has changed catastrophically. I see signs of mass hunger of the kind that I've only seen in conditions of severe drought, near famine conditions in rural India. People have been reduced to, in Delhi, the government after some time said we'll provide food. And people have to, I've seen lines which without exaggeration can extend to 1 to 2 kilometers in the hot sun, where people have to sit for hours waiting for one ladle of food. And after that, they have to wait, and then the next meal comes, and then again you stand in line for that kind of wait. It's a desperate situation of mass hunger. And of course, a large segment of people who were migrants then decided that if this is how the government is treating us, then we have no option except to go home. But the government, in that one 4-hour notice, cancelled all trains. And please understand that at the time the lockdown was announced, there were just 100 cases diagnosed of COVID in India. If in that stage the government followed a humane policy, it could have done two or three things. It should have given a week to people to organize themselves, and if they needed to go home, to go home. There would have been very little infection at that stage. Today we have 80,000 cases. That time we had 100 cases, uh, and uh, and and likewise, uh, uh, the government needed to, and we have been saying this from day one, that the only fair way to deal with this, and people have done this in countries around the world, is to compensate people for wage loss for the period of the lockdown. And so at least statutory minimum wages should have been paid to every person. And we have 80 million tons of grain in our government warehouses. Uh, Today, after 50 days, the finance minister has finally agreed to distribute 1 million tons. I don't know what she wants to do with the remaining 79 million tons. But there's an unwillingness even to distribute this grain. And so we have mass hunger staring at us in the face. There are two other points, and then I'll open it up to questions. Uh, uh, the health crisis is further complicated by India's complete privatization of healthcare, even worse than in the United States. In India, 80 out of 100 doctors, 80% of our doctors are in the private sector. 80%. 80% of ventilators are in private for-profit hospitals. 66% of hospital beds are in the private sector. Only 10% of COVID treatment has been done by private hospitals. So it is 20% of the doctors with 20% of the ventilators and 33% of hospital beds who are having to deal with the entire pandemic. And in that, we can well imagine that when it catches up with the poor in the shanties and the migrants and the rural poor, what is going to happen to them? The last part of what makes this an unprecedented humanitarian crisis is what has been uniquely India's contribution, which is the communalization, the willful communalization of the pandemic. It is stunning to all of us that at a time when we were all under lockdown, within a week of the lockdown, at a time when we would have imagined that the only thought on in the minds and hearts of the ruling establishment would be to find ways to keep us all safe from this pandemic, what began to happen was the communalization and led entirely by the state. It is true that the Tablighi Jamaat was unwise in holding a very large international gathering at the time uh, of COVID, but well before the lockdown. But it is also true that they did it with government permission. It is also important to remember that this was a time when even Parliament continued to be in session. When there were religious gatherings, not just of the Tablighi Jamaat, but of various other religious groups. There were political gatherings. This was also a time when in Madhya Pradesh, MLAs were being bought and sold and assembled and huddled. So a lot of people made mistakes at that point of time, including the organizers of the Tablighi Jamaat. But it was only the Tablighi Jamaat which was then, in every official news bulletin, this was carried. Statisticians tell you about the statistical bias because we have very low testing and at that time even lower testing. But 25,000 tests were conducted with regard to the Tablighi Jamaat participants and their family members and their contacts. And obviously, when you do such intensive testing, you will find a much higher proportion of people who test positive compared to the other rest of the population. And then you had these right wing news channels which had these hysterical programs every night, which added to this communalization. Then you had a whole series of fake videos. All of them have been proved to be fake videos, where people looking like Muslims were seen as shown to be spitting into vegetables and selling them, or spitting into people's food, or sneezing at people. So all of this was done in such a cynical way. Not a single person who made these fake and circulated these fake videos has been punished. But the government has succeeded in diverting all attention from its failures. It could have done a great deal to keep us safe, to prepare for the pandemic when things were happening around the world, which it did not do. But instead of those questions, they were managed uh, to convert it into actually to communalize the pandemic at a time when we needed to stand in solidarity with one another. And it's also a time when a large number of arrests have been made in northeast Delhi, which had seen communal violence. And it is a time when those people who were detained and arrested could not even call out their lawyers, because the lawyers were under lockdown and not permitted to come into their defense. So this is really the broad picture that I wanted to place before you, of an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, dealt with. It was and the crisis is created by a set of public policies which at best were designed to protect people of the middle class, who had homes and who had assured earnings, uh, and decent living conditions. It did nothing to protect the large mass of the working poor. On the other hand, it placed unbelievably heavy burdens of joblessness and hunger on their shoulders. It prevented them from even making their journeys home, and they continue to walk. These are journeys and the number of people who have moved is probably now higher than the number of people who moved during partition, which was the biggest cataclysmic event. And people are moving on foot 500, 1,000 kilometers, with small children, with babies, with no food and with no money. The health system is privatized and has no way of responding to especially the poor who will be hit by this disease. And to make this very grim and somber story even more grim, the government has not missed its opportunity to actually communalize the pandemic, and make it and to build a high pitch of anti-Muslim sentiment in the middle of all of this. And that is the crisis that we are facing. I believe that this crisis, this how we deal with this pandemic in India, in the United States, and in every part of the world, will reveal the true character of our collective, the soul of our nations will be revealed. And the souls of our nations, whether in the United States or in India, that is being revealed uh, is one that is very distressing, in which a sense of sisterhood and brotherhood with people of disadvantage and poverty is completely absent, and there is no sense of justice, no sense of compassion, uh, and for whatever world we will have at the other end of the pandemic, let us resolve to make one which is kind, which is equal, and which is just. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsh, for sharing your perspective and bringing awareness to the ground situation, as you called it, the unprecedented humanitarian crisis, uh, primarily to protect. All the relief work is primarily to protect the middle class with complete apathy towards the poor and impoverished communities. it's a shocking and grim picture that you paint for our audience today. So as you heard, I would encourage everybody to go to our website. As you heard, the need is humongous. Go to imrcusa.org and support us through your donations in this last 10 days of Ramadan, including your fitras, that we can try and make sure that they reach in time before the Eid. We will continue to support and provide the food packets and the rest of the relief work. Again, now we'll take some time before we go into the Q&A. There are lots of questions. I again encourage our audience and the viewers and listeners to continue to post your questions. I've made notes of all the questions here. We'll be going through each of those as the time permits. But for now, we'll switch over for a short video to see IMRC's relief work again. All right, let's get into the Q&A as our audience are eagerly waiting for that section to start. Faraz Moin asked the question. Thank you, Faraz, for posting this question. How can we focus our efforts, and also what has been done so far through the legal assistance of IMRC and various other organizations to support the students of various universities, including Jamia Millia Islamia and JNU, who are falsely accused under draconian laws such as UAPA?
It's going to be a long and difficult legal battle, and one which we are deeply committed to continue fighting. As I told you, this particular phase where they started getting picked up during the time of the most stringent lockdown was an especially difficult time, because our lawyers were not allowed to move. I hope that from lockdown 0.4 actually is what 4.0 is what is starting from Monday, and we hope that there will be greater freedom of movement. But even through this, we have tried to fight in many different ways. The challenges that are, where we would normally have expected some relief, going to the Supreme Court, going to the high courts, all our petitions going to the National Human Rights Commission are not working. But we need to continue to sustain these legal battles, which we would. But we need to recognize at the same time that this is really an almost unprecedented time. I have been working on legal justice for survivors of mass violence for a long time in my life, since 2002. And 2002 seemed a very, very formidable moment, and it was a struggle of many years. But that was a time when we still had a National Human Rights Commission headed by Justice Verma, who was, extremely fine person, and he stood by us. It was a time when the Supreme Court passed many important judgments. It was a time when the media, significant segments of the media, were outspoken and independent. We have none of those advantages today, and so the battle is going to be, and continues to be, that much more difficult. So the only thing that I can say is the determination to continue to fight this battle. Some of us are being criminalized as well along the way. I had filed a petition immediately after the Delhi violence started, asking why Kapil Mishra and Anurag Thakur, who had given openly, hate speeches, openly instigating hate violence, that at least FIR should be registered against them. Justice Muralidhar was a very fine judge before whom this case came up, and he passed very strong directions and gave them 24 hours. And within those 24 hours, he was moved out. And somebody then filed a petition in the same case, stating that I had actually done hate speech, which is quite extraordinary. So they took a video which I had of I had addressed the students of Jamia the day after the violence in Jamia. They were very anguished, and thousands of students had gathered, and they reached out to me, and I went up and I spoke about us standing together, and the portion of my speech uh, was basically where I said that we are living in a time when we have to fight to reclaim the India that we had written into and promised ourselves in our constitution, an India which is based on justice, equality, freedom, and above all on fraternity and solidarity and love. And I said that I do not have expectations that this battle will be fought by Parliament, because political parties across the spectrum are not showing the moral courage to fight this battle. I said it's not going to be fought or upheld or won even in the courts, because I'm extremely disappointed by the judgments of the Supreme Court in matters like Ayodhya and Kashmir. Uh, I said that it is going to be fought by we, the people of India, on the streets. But I added by non-violent resistance based on the principles of non-violence as Mahatma Gandhi has taught us. And I said even more than that, it will be resolved in our hearts, in your hearts and mine, whether we allow hate to have colonized our hearts. So they took the video and they chopped off lots of portions of it where I talked about love, non-violence, love, and solidarity. And they said, they basically had, I don't believe in Parliament, I don't believe uh, in the Supreme Court. All I believe in is that we have to fight on the streets. And they said, here you are instigating violence. And the High Court accepted that petition. Uh, they didn't take action, so I went to the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court Chief Justice's bench said, why should we listen to Harsh Mander when he says he has no faith in the Supreme Court? And it seemed, that instead they would be putting me into into prison rather than, and there's no talk about arresting Kapil Mishra or Anurag Thakur. And there was a huge outcry across the country when this happened. Fortunately, there was a lot of support, etc., saying, "How can you accuse?" And the real video was then circulated of about 8 minutes, which is very far from a speech which instigates any kind of hate or violence. It's an entire video based on the idea of love and solidarity. But still, the matter continues. The High Court is now hearing hate speeches by Kapil Mishra, Anurag Thakur, and also Harsh Mander. So this is the kind of environment in which what investigations they're doing. So I think they're building a narrative in which they're saying that the peaceful protests against the citizenship law, in which people like me were played a role in the forefront. They were the cause of the violence, and not the hate mongers. So this is really the twist, and in that framework, the student leaders of Jamia are being picked up, because as leaders of the anti-CA protest, sooner or later they'll get to the senior people as well. So it is a very difficult, it is a very fraught time. The only answer that I have again is something that Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, had said: "You do not fight fascism because you will win. You fight fascism because it is fascism." And it is that fight that we will have to continue to do.
Thank you. I mean, you paint a rather grim picture again, Harsh, that this battle cannot be won through the courts. Neither the political opposition is showing the moral courage, and it's a battle for hearts and minds on the ground. That sounds like a long battle that we have ahead of us. And again, as you said, what matters is the fight, not the outcome. With that, I'll have a few more related questions on this topic. There were specific questions from Shanawaz. What is IMRC's legal clinic service? What is that offering? If you can explain that. And also, there were some specific questions about Sister Safura's case. Are you aware? Or can you share any details about what's going on with her and the case that's pending right now? And there were several other questions. I think you touched upon those topics as to how lockdown is affecting this legal battle against the students. So I'll turn it over to you to take a stab at those.
The IMRC's legal clinic I'm not aware of, so I won't be able to comment on that. But we have built up a large team of of young lawyers who are fighting legal cases. We started off also during the time of the lynching, and so we are fighting a lot of cases connected with lynching. We are fighting cases connected with the communal violence, and I spoke about this particular matter. Surur, who leads the legal team, also had filed a petition that very night of the violence, where we actually started getting these distress calls about even the ambulance from Al Hind Hospital, where there were 22 people very badly injured. 2 had lost their lives. They were not being allowed to move them to a big hospital. And so she had gone in the middle of the night. She rang up Justice Muralidhar, who was still in position, and he held a court at midnight in his house, and he passed orders for the movement of the ambulances and for literally thousands of lives being saved. And so this is the kind of legal work that this is doing. We're also trying to stand up against every kind of hate speech. So we are continuously not allowing hate speech to pass, and like this petition which I spoke about, we also filed this. So IMRC is also one of the supporters of this legal work. So then we there's this very committed group of young lawyers who are involved in this. We have senior lawyers who advise us. So that's the nature of the work.
Do you have any specific comments about Sister Safura's case and what's going on?
Sister Safura's case, I mean, none of us really know what is going on. What is terrifying is that, you see, it was bad enough to charge them, as I fear that they're going to charge many of us as instigating the violence, making the anti-CA protest appear like it was a violent protest, whereas it was really a protest of a very beautiful kind, to uphold the constitution and to defend, and in the spirit of what Mahatma Gandhi had taught us, how to fight with love and with non-violence and with truth. So there's an attempt to completely give all dissent against the government and its laws and policies the character of anti-national work. So that is one part. But what is very ominous is the use of the anti-terror law, kind of, which is normally used. It's not formally an anti-terror law, but it's a law of preventive detention in extreme cases where the normal kinds of protections that you have of due process are also compromised. And so before them, we have a number of very senior and respected activists who were also have been also detained under UAPA. Sudha Bhardwaj is one of them, who spent a lifetime serving, working with workers in Chhattisgarh and defending, upholding their rights. Anand Temtumble, who's one of our best Dalit intellectual scholars. Uh, 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 Gautam Navlakha, who is with the PUDR, the People's Union of Democratic Rights. So these are all people who have now been detained under the UAPA, and there's no sign of any court listening to any plea for their bail, even during this time of COVID, where the general principle was that you should decongest jails. Our Jamia students at least are young, and therefore much less vulnerable to this particular infection and to mortality from it. But Anand Teltumble and Gautam Navlakha were arrested during the lockdown period. They're in their 70s. They have multiple comorbidities, and yet they have been detained under these provisions.
Thank you, Harsh, for taking those questions. Quick comments here. So about the legal clinic, there is no service as such that's called legal clinic, but Harsh talked about the partnership that we have with Harsh's legal team that IMRC continues to provide support for. So, Sister Farah, as you asked, how can you contribute financially to Harsh's legal efforts and the efforts of the legal team? You can go, you can do those financial contributions through IMRC. And again, I encourage all the listeners and viewers to go to imrcusa.org and look for the donate button and continue to support these legal as well as the relief battles. We'll move on. I think there are a bunch of questions around the status of migrant workers. And there was a question from Brother Larry Muhammad. He asked about, is there anything we can do to the migrant families, any legal assistance to the migrant families who saw deaths as they were walking back to their homes on the road? What is the outcome? How can we provide any justice to those families? And I think there is a related question about what in general can we do to these, because there are a lot of us who are seeing these videos coming out, devastating videos of people walking barefoot, putting empty water bottles as shoes, having kids on their arms or on their luggage, carrying them through. So it's kind of devastating to see those videos coming out of India that we left behind. So what can be done? What can we do from here to support the relief efforts to support those migrant workers?
See, the scale is firstly, the scale is immense. I mean, some of us have been talking about the informal workforce and the circular migrant workforce. These are the people who have built our cities. These are the people who built our houses, our apartment buildings, our offices, our highways, our roads, our bridges. These are the people who clean our city. These are the people who drive our transport. These are the people who cook our food, take care of our children. They are the people who make our life possible. And yet they have been completely invisible. They have been people with no rights. This is the first time that middle class India is even seeing them, acknowledging them. And these painful videos, I hope, at least will be something that will, we will learn to respect, the work that these people are doing. They sometimes constitute, in a place like Surat, there are migrant workers from Ganjam in Orissa who run the power looms in Surat. They form something like 60%, and yet they have no rights whatsoever. And overnight, they were just turned away. What can be done legally is, again, I'm sorry to give a very very disheartening answers. Uh, the truth is that I'm a person whose entire life and life's work and politics has been based on an almost naive optimism, a belief in human goodness and kindness, and in the certainty that justice will happen. I continue to believe it. I remember what Martin Luther King had said, that the arc of history is long, but in the end it bends towards justice. But how long will this arc be? How long will it take to bend towards justice at this very difficult and dark time? Um, I had again taken a petition to the Supreme Court immediately on the question of the migrant workers. And I've written a very long report on what happened in that case. I've written an article, and it's worth looking at these at that detail. I mean, it's shocking to see, because what happened was that the government of India's Solicitor General claimed, no, we are looking up, we are feeding everybody, we are providing for everybody, etc. We had gone in our petition basically to say that at the very least you have to provide them wages. If they had provided them wages from day one, and they had provided them rations from day one, uh, this exodus would not have happened. They would not have had to leave. Uh, the Chief Justice of India, no less than the Chief Justice of India, actually made the remark. He said the government of India is assuring us that all of them are being fed. Why should they need wages? He actually said this. And at the risk of contempt, and already I'm sort of, the Supreme Court has already asked me about my contempt in the matter that I just spoke. But I was really tempted in my heart to say to the respected Chief Justice that if you think you're just getting food, so you shouldn't get wages, I will get you the best food and I'll send you lunch and dinner every day. You should not get your wages by the same measure. The problem is that we have begun to look at the poor and to look at uh, 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 the rest of us, the middle class people, with very different standards. And I think that the possibility of legal justice for the migrant workers is very slender. Other petitions have also been made for their transportation and for various other things. Uh, After about 15 migrants got run over by the train, somebody again went to the Supreme Court. Again, the Supreme Court judge said, what can we do if people choose to sleep on railway tracks? But this is again a long battle. I think that each of us, the state is refusing to provide them transportation, to pay for the transportation. It's well within, the numbers are huge. The government is not acknowledging it, but we are, now we're talking about something like 80 million migrants. Is the figure that is slowly being acknowledged. 80 million people. Now, the movement of 80 million people is a huge task, but it's not beyond the capacities of the state. If the state really had resolved, we have a massive railway network. The state could still declare that for 15 days we will run trains only for migrants and we will not charge them any money. The state will bear the cost of running these trains and making sure that everybody is able to reach home. But the state is not doing it. And so the best that we can do is what we are doing, is trying to help provide food packets, helping people along the way. They're kind people across who have been reaching out to these people. But still, it's again a drop in the ocean. You see people hiding themselves inside containers at 40 degrees, truck containers. There was one, about 14 or 16 workers were in, what is called that cement mixer, and you've traveled in the heat in a cement mixer for 500 kilometers. It is that desperation that we are seeing on the streets with the migrants, and the total lack of compassion of the state is spectacular.
Thank you again, Harsh. And shout out to Brother Muhammad Hassan, as well as Brother Imran, who asked the previous questions on how to support the migrant workers and their in the relief work. I'll try to combine two or three related questions that talk about again what where are we heading basically. Faraz and Shahzada Sufyan and Brother Iqbal asked these questions around where are we heading in terms of do the minorities need to carve out a new contract as we see the secular state kind of diminishing as we see in front of our eyes, and so-called Hindu Rashtra kind of take unfolding in front of our eyes. And also, is it bordering all the way to the apartheid South Africa? Is the situation that bad, or we're not there yet? And the other question, I think it's a very interesting question. I think uh, is there anything we can do to influence the political opposition to take the moral courage to fight this battle? Is there anything?
Um, uh, to the second question, uh, I think that we see faint, glimmers once in a while in the Congress leadership, but it is faint and erratic, and large segments of the political opposition, the Aam Aadmi Party, the TRS, most of them have not shown the moral courage to stand up for the secular values in this country. So where do we go from here? I think that when I say this is one of the darkest periods that we are passing through, it also calls for the best in us. I think that what is the only solace and hope for India is that a large part of the battle against the injustice to Muslims is being fought by non-Muslims who stand in solidarity. The anti-CA protests across the country showed, in students and universities, for a law that was basically, reducing the citizenship rights of the Muslim community. It was not the Muslim community alone which was fighting. Of course, the Shaheen Baghs and all were substantially of working class Muslims. But even there, the solidarity of non-Muslims was large. But in many protests that I attended in university campuses, etc., the large majority of people were not Muslim. And I think that as long as we have still the capacity to stand in solidarity with each other, and this is something that I often would raise, that if you have to fight, if you have to win the battle, both on the citizenship law question and for the constitution, as we saw it, but even now during the whole pandemic and its aftermath, I think that we will succeed only to the extent that we can strengthen our capacities for solidarity, to stand with each other. And that is what I feel, even to a gathering like the one that I am speaking to now. I'll say something that I often said, during the anti-CA protests. I was called upon to speak to massive gatherings of people, 1 lakh people, 1.5 lakh people, whether in Bangalore or Calcutta or thousands in different places, or in smaller towns in Pune, in various parts of the country. And in these meetings, I used to find the sense of joy and satisfaction for people of visibly Muslim identity to stand with the national flag, claiming the country as their own. And I used to often say, that don't give anyone henceforward, and I said this in the Jamia speech as well, which I said that don't let anyone in future ask you to prove your love and your loyalty to this country, least of all those who took no part in the freedom struggle. uh, uh, in 1947, uh, my parents were from that part of India, which is now in Pakistan. They were from Rawalpindi. They had to also come with all the horrors of partition. But I said that for the Hindus and Sikhs and people of other communities, uh, we are Indian by chance. We didn't have a choice. For the Indian Muslim is an Indian by choice because their parents and grandparents had a choice in 1947, and they chose to live in an India which promised equal respect and equal rights for people of every faith. So you are Indian by choice. The rest of us are Indian by chance. And so your love for your country can can never be questioned. This is one thing that I would say. But I would also say, and I'll say that here, is that this duty of solidarity falls on all our shoulders. And I would ask uh, the tens of thousands of Muslim men and women that I would see in the audiences that I would address in these anti-CA rallies, I would ask them, now put your hand on your heart and give me an answer to this question. And that question of mine is, suppose it was not Muslims who were being, whose rights were being taken away by this signature amendment. Suppose it was Dalits. Put your hand in your heart and tell me, would you have been here? Would you have been in this protest? Would you have come here with the same spirit of solidarity and anger against the injustice of that law? And when you put your hand on your heart, and the large majority of you will not be able to say truthfully that I would have still been here with the same passion, in the same numbers, if it was an anti-Dalit law rather than an anti-Muslim law. Let us at least for tomorrow resolve for ourselves. Let us resolve that next time my Dalit brother or my Adivasi sister or people in poverty of any community suffer injustice, I will stand with them with the same spirit. That solidarity has to be your new social contract, none other. That is the new social contract that we have to build for ourselves. That is my conviction.
Thank you.
Prophet Muhammad, had said many things. One of them was that if you put your hand on the head of an orphan child, you will आपको उतना स्वाब मिलेगा जितना उसके सर पे बाल हैं. But he never said, if you put your hand on the head of a Muslim orphan, you will get swab. Did he say that? He did not. So why does our charity have to limit itself? Why does not our charity, why do we not actually see all of India with an equally open heart? That is the solidarity, that is the social contract that we have to build.
Absolutely. Thank you for those comments. Again, you reminded of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, as you said, what comes to my mind is a treaty called Hilful Fudul that he signed before he became a prophet with the Arabs in Mecca to protect the rights of the travelers who were coming and whose rights were being oppressed. And then when he migrated to Medina after Islam, he was asked, would you still go if somebody calls to you to honor the Hilful Fudul Accord and treaty? He said, absolutely. Even now, regardless of who that person is whose rights are being oppressed, I would still go and stand with them. So thank you for those comments. Really appreciated your time. I know it's pretty late there in India. Again, thank you for taking the time to speak with us and our audience. I know there are still questions and comments. I think we've touched upon. I think there are related topics that we already touched upon. So we again thank you everyone for joining us. Now, before we leave, we would like to just remind again the work that IMRC is doing and ask for your support to continue to provide your support through donations. Again, go to imrcusa.org and look for the donate button. And now we'll again play a 30 seconds video to kind of reiterate what IMRC is doing in India. Thank you. We'll make a short dua and then we'll end this program. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا وارحمنا وأنت خير الراحمين. ربنا وانصرنا ولا تنصر علينا يا رب العالمين. ربنا تقبل رمضاننا. ربنا تقبل رمضاننا. ربنا تقبل زكاتنا وصدقاتنا. Oh Allah, accept our charities and our donations and our zakats. Oh Allah, help us in fighting this oppression and this fascism in non-violent way. Oh Allah, provide relief to those oppressed communities, no matter where they are in the world. Thank you. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Thanks again for
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you.